Guys, welcome back to another video here. In this video, we're going to be checking out how I built this enclosure for my little group of Granite leaf-tailed geckos. So before we do get started, guys, there is something that I do want to actually point out. Jason Rogers and myself have actually started up the Australian Herpetoculture Podcast now. It's going to be all about the Australian reptile hobby with a strong focus on sort of like natural keeping methods of reptiles and amphibians. But in saying that, yeah, we're not going to pigeonhole ourselves. We really want to kind of expand out and talk to different keepers and do some interviews and bits and pieces along the way. So by the time that this video comes out, I believe either the first episode or even possibly the second episode of that Australian Herpetoculture Podcast should actually be live over on iTunes and Spotify and maybe some other platforms. But yeah, man, we have to really give a lot of thanks out to Eric and Owen from Morelia Python Radio for taking us under their wing and giving us a big leg up into this. We're really excited to get this started because, you know, it's something that Jason and I are both passionate about. As most of you might know, Jason did kind of hook me up with a lot of the sort of bioactive stuff and probably really pushed me in the direction of bioactive as well. In saying that, I dare say that he's probably getting back into the hobby sooner rather than he thinks. So yeah, it'll be really exciting to kind of see his collection grow and, you know, what he kind of does along the way. So without any further ado, guys, let's hop into this build. Let's look at some natural history of these geckos. I'm really excited about this build. It's one of my favorites so far. So yeah, let's hop across and start watching. So here we can have a little bit of a look at where these guys actually come from. So they come from the top of New South Wales on the east coast and bordering with the southeast Queensland ranges, the granite outcrop areas over here. Man, these mountains look absolutely impassable to most people, but you can see these geckos are right at home in amongst all of these granite outcrops. You can see how well the camouflage works with these guys, and you can imagine how they'd be kind of looking in the middle of these outcrops during the day. So for this enclosure build, I started with the old faithful bastion boards. So these are an insulation board, I believe they're 30mm thick. So this gives me kind of a good platform to work off. Basically I just cut these boards to size, silicone them into place, and this is kind of like the base layer of foam that I kind of built everything off. Using some Gorilla Glue, you can get this glue from Bunnings, it's pretty accessible. I just kind of cut out some shapes of the bastion boards and an old knauf board as well that I've got there. And just kind of created a few different layers and a few different textures. Basically just using the glue, I just built up some layers, used some skewers as well, just some like old kebab skewers, the kind of like timber variety, and kind of just pushed that through the boards and into the back kind of foam area. This is just an easy way to kind of get it all going and get it kind of set quick, and you can kind of build it out pretty quick. So you guys can see here that I'm using my faithful foam cutter. I absolutely love this tool. It was one of the best $30 I ever spent. The only downside to this is it does kind of create like a bit of vapor that's not exactly desirable. I have since gone out and bought some vapor fills on my dust mask so then I don't have to breathe this stuff in. It's pretty horrible stuff. I mean, you can see that I'm using a fan there just to kind of blow the vapors around and get them away from me, but you know, prevention's better than cure. Here you can actually see that I'm putting in a bit of detail work. I'm actually using a soldering iron for this. Same sort of principle though, it heats up to a nice hot sort of temperature. Don't know what temperature it heats up to, but it's hot enough you can't touch it, and it melts the foam really easily. So for the first layer of tile pointing, I just put it across into this little pail here and mixed it with just a bit of plain water, nothing too special, but basically it just makes it into a runnier mixture. And this is a lot easier to just whack onto the board and kind of spread it all over everywhere. As we go through these layers, usually I do 3 layers depending on the species of animal that I'm going to keep in the enclosure, but I kind of build up the thickness of the layers.
So each time you just use a little bit less water, kind of make that layer a little bit thicker, and it becomes a lot tougher. I usually find that the first layer is the worst one to get down. It's a little bit more tedious to kind of paint into everything, and the following layers seem to adhere really well to the one prior. Obviously, the more detailed the enclosure, the harder it is going to be to get some paint into some areas. One of my most difficult enclosures to paint was actually my brown tree snake enclosure, where it had those two hides incorporated into the design. If you guys haven't seen that build, it is a really good build and I did enjoy doing it, so you should go back and have a look at that one. As you can see, I've taped up all the black edges to everything as well, so that's just an easy way to kind of prevent getting this stuff all over the Exoterra kind of detail work with the black plastic around the enclosure. If you get this stuff on there, it is a nightmare to get off. You can see on this layer I've actually put a bit of grey oxide through there as well, just to kind of get a bit of a different colour to most of my other terrariums. I thought that was a good idea just to kind of brush it in. Something you may have missed there is I actually went back over the enclosure and kind of dabbed it with the paintbrush too, just to get like the rockwork to be really textured. So instead of having brush marks in there, I kind of got it so it's like all speckly and a little bit spiky. It's actually really good for the geckos to get their claws into, and they seem to really love it. So here you can see I'm actually using a bit of watered down black acrylic paint to kind of create a bit of a wash effect over the rocks. And I'm painting this into all the recesses and all the cracks, and then just giving it a blast off with a bit of water afterwards, just to kind of let it run in and kind of create a bit of texture and a bit of depth to the enclosure. So basically for this enclosure, what I've done is I've created a whole bunch of different kind of dots and layers and bits and pieces, just to try to mimic the natural rockwork from the granite belt where these guys come from. So I did it with browns, whites, greens, blacks, all sorts of different colours. I even went to the extent of painting some, what I think looks like lichen onto the rockwork as well, to just help these geckos blend in it even further. This is the first time that I've actually painted lichen onto rockwork as well, so I thought I'd take my time with it and have a bit of fun. You know, absolute worst case, you can always paint over this sort of stuff, so don't feel like you're really stuck in where you got to go. If you don't like it, you can always start again. It's not that hard. I actually used a few different shades of green to kind of create that bit of lichen effect, because in the wild, it's never the exact same colour everywhere you go. It's kind of a little bit mottled, and this will help those geckos blend right into the background. As you can see there, these sides are blacked out with a simple vinyl. This enclosure looks so good in place. It's one of my favourite ones. I think just for the way that the rocks actually look, I find that these ones look a little bit more naturally shaped than some of my other enclosures. Every single enclosure that I build is a learning curve. This enclosure here too will be hooked up to the Mist King system, so these geckos will get a couple of daily sprays of light rain, just to kind of keep the relative humidity up inside of the enclosure. And as you can see here, I'm actually adding in a little drain pipe. So that pipe's got a few holes down the bottom, so if I need to drain water out of the bottom of this enclosure, I can stick a little siphon down there and drain the water out of the bottom of the enclosure. A lot of people will use bulkheads of sorts to kind of, you know, drill through the glass in the back of the Exoterra to tie up some drain pipes and things. I'm not quite that confident, and I'd hate to break a whole Exoterra for it. So here you can see the kind of layers that we're going to use inside of this enclosure. We've got our drainage layers, our hydro balls, we've got some fly screen there, we've got some Australian native potting soil as well, and over here we've got some crushed gold granite, as well as some eucalyptus mulch. Of course, the first layer that we're going to put down is the expanded clay hydro balls. These are used in all sorts of things, including some hydroponic systems, and they're fantastic for your bioactive vivariums and terrariums as well. I'm going to put a decent layer of this stuff down. I get this all through Fish Organics and Reptile Supplies, one of the channel sponsors. So shout out to Corey, and thanks again for hooking me up with some good bioactive gear. Really appreciate it. He also supplies me with the fly screen that I use in these terrariums. You can either get it through him and his bioactive kits, or you could also just get it through Bunnings. I find that the fiberglass one's a lot easier to use than the aluminium fly screen. The aluminium one's a bit difficult to kind of bend and shape into place. Of course, in these terrariums I have to cut a little hole in the fly screen just to make sure that I get that standpipe nice and clear. Because that's going to be kind of at the level where our soil is going to end. And it's going to be a little bit more even through there. So you can see that I'm whacking a good amount of Australian native soil into this. This is going to be perfect for the plants. This particular soil mix actually does have a few little fertilizer pellets through there, but they're super mild, so they're not really going to affect the geckos in any way, especially since these aren't really a burrowing species except for when they're nesting, in which case it'll be very rare, very seldom that they'll actually come in contact with any sort of fertilizer in this terrarium. So here you can see one of the plants that is going to go into this terrarium. This is a Grevillea forest rambler. I'm not exactly sure on the Latin of this species. I dare say that it probably is some sort of hybrid, but it seems to be doing pretty good inside of here. It can kind of handle more shade and also wetter areas, so this will probably be a little bit more suited towards this terrarium. Another plant that I'm going to be using here is this callistemon as well. Another kind of Australian native as well. I'm kind of hit and miss on a few Australian natives. I'm yet to find the perfect types, but this particular one, even to date, you know, about a month on from planting this terrarium out, is still alive and doing well, and actually starting to grow and bud, so happy days. Again, this is another one that can handle shade, and it can also handle some wet areas inside of the terrariums. So after I've kind of put the native soil down the bottom, I actually put the plants in next, because what we're going to do is kind of build up our layers around the plants, but at least here you know the plants are in contact with that good rich soil, and you know that they should be getting the nutrients in theory that they really need. So after getting the kind of placement of the plant, I'm going to just kind of build up the soil around it. We can always add more soil in as we go too. I've got plenty on hand. I end up just placing the plants kind of off center, so they're not on, you know, opposing corners of the terrarium. I want to try to make it look a little bit more natural. So as you can see, I just built up the soil a little bit there, and here we're actually going to make a little bit of a mix. So this is a bit of eucalyptus mulch and crushed granite. Just kind of bulk out the granite. It kind of helps dry it out a little bit further as well. And as you can see, I kind of built it up to where that pipe kind of came up the top of the enclosure there. So next step's just to try to get some sort of branches and bits and pieces in there. These geckos don't particularly need it, nor do they use it, but it just kind of adds a little bit more to the enclosure as the plants end up growing out. That I do to all my terrariums that use this sort of drainage system is I end up putting some thick aquarium sponge down in the drain pipe, and this just means that nothing can kind of get down there, whether it be dirt or animals or anything like that, and it just means that I can pull that sponge out with a pair of tweezers and drain it out. So as you can see, I whacked some good old Aussie Leaf litter in there with a few gum leaves, and now we're going to add in some cleanup crew. So springtails are on the menu right now, and I make sure to do my fair share of springies in there, because these guys are going to help break down mould and all sorts of nasties. The easiest way to get springtails out is to actually just make them fill up the container that the springies are in, and then just drain it off the top. Springtails are hydrophobic, so they're going to float to the surface and straight out of their little culture and into your terrarium. So another crucial part of your cleanup crew is of course some slaters or isopods or wood lice, whatever you want to call them. These are the variety that we get here in Australia, or one variety I should say. We also get another type that kind of roll up, but I find this variety is pretty easy to breed, so they're a nice one to get inside of these terrariums. It's all is taking a bit of bark out of the culture that I've got them in and just knocking them into the terrarium. A terrarium like this is going to be perfect for them too, because there's plenty of bark and leaf litter down the bottom of it. So these guys are going to munch all through this sort of stuff, be nice and hidden from the geckos. These guys are an awesome little addition to any bioactive vivarium or terrarium. These are the roly-poly varieties that I was talking about earlier. This is a little sped up clip so you can see them actually walking off, ready to munch down on all sorts of things that are inside your vivariums. Here's a nice little close-up of this terrarium. I think it's got a really cool one. I really like the paint job on this one actually. I think the gecko's going to blend in perfectly and really make use of the extra wall space. One of the main reasons that I started doing a lot of these enclosures up is that I can actually have 3 usable walls for a lot of animals, whether they've got sticky pad toes or they don't. At least in this case, the nails on the S.wyberba have got a lot more space to run around in. So it's time to get some inhabitants inside of this enclosure. I do actually have a few of these guys. In this enclosure I've got a small group of them. They are breeding, but I'm yet to kind of determine which girls are the ones that become gravid. I have 4 females and 1 male that's doing the job. And I've actually got 2 hatchlings out this season. I unfortunately lost a couple as well, and I lost a few eggs. But, some's better than none. And at this stage, because these girls are all quite old, I will be holding the hatchlings back just to kind of secure a population for, for the hobby and for the future of these geckos, because they're not a very commonly seen gecko in Australia. In fact, I'm not actually sure of anybody else with them, to be quite frank. So it's one of those species that I'm trying to be delicate with.
So guys, I really hope that you enjoyed the video today. As much as I did doing this build, this is probably one of my favourite ones, as I said earlier. Really going to see how these plants and stuff go in here. I reckon the callistemon should be alright. I'm really wanting to crack grevilleas, so that is something that I'm really wanting to do, and I think this particular one, this forest rambler, should be a little bit better. It seems like it should hopefully handle a little bit of water. So yeah, we're going to see how this goes, and of course, like anything, I'm going to keep you updated on all of it. You'll see it all throughout out my videos or whatever, and I'll do little updates here and there and different sort of plant, recommendations and stuff along the way as well. I'm really loving doing these Australian builds with these Australian native plants, whether they're little hybrids and stuff like that. It's all learning, at least they're Australian plants, they're not just pothos and, umbrella plants and bromeliads and stuff like that. So yeah, anyway, without me rambling any further, make sure to go and check me out on all my social media. Facebook, obviously here at YouTube, Instagram, Teespring, Patreon. And go and check out the Australian Herpetoculture Podcast as well. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you guys all in the next video. Take it easy.